Have they lost yet?
They lost to a certain team that was owned by the former CEO of Chesapeake Energy. That would be the Oklahoma City Thunder. That's a very sensitive topic in this town, Russell. And
they won 18 in a row, 17 in a row, something like that?
I think it was 18 or 19.
Look, I'm from Philadelphia. We had a 20-some game losing streak going at the same time, so it's very difficult for me to read about that. Oh.
I think are we all set?
Again, the thumbs up.
Well, welcome one and all. I'm Robert Rivard, and it is my distinct pleasure to be the moderator today for our conversation with Russell Gold, who's the senior energy reporter for the Wall Street Journal, based in Austin, Texas. But important for me, and I hope important for all of you, this is also something of a homecoming because Russell Gold was a young reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer in the mid-'90s, and in 1996, when I was editor at the San Antonio Express News, we hired Russell, and he came to San Antonio and had a wonderful 3 or 4 year run as a reporter here, met his wife,
absolutely,
and got married in San Antonio, worked in our Capitol Bureau in Austin for a while before moving on to the major leagues in the big time. And he has written a terrific book about fracking, the boom. I've seen 4 or 5 books on the subject, and none of them kept my attention until this one. It's really a terrific book, Russell. I want to congratulate you on it and get you talking very quickly about it.
Sure.
And I know a lot of people are very passionate about fracking because right in our backyard is the Eagleford shale play, and so people on all sides of the issue will have a lot of things to contribute to the conversation. It is being filmed by C-SPAN, and so when we get to the Q&A, there'll be somebody in the audience moving around with a microphone, and I'll ask you to just hold your question until you have the microphone in front of you so it gets recorded. And if people feel like we're going on too long just between the two of us and you just can't wait to ask your question, just start waving your arm and I'll realize it's time to go. So here you are, the energy reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and you've covered the Deep Horizon oil spill in the Gulf, for which you won a Gerald Loeb Award, and you were a finalist as a Pulitzer for that. And you're covering energy, and covering energy means covering fracking, and you're going all over the country to do it. And then you get a telephone call from your parents.
Right.
And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that telephone call and what it was about. It's just too good of a story not to share.
Well, I started covering fracking back in 2003, so I've been doing this about 10 years. Thank you. I went on my first frack job in 2003. So by 2008 or so, I had been to several. I had toured the Barnett up north of Fort Worth and watched it slowly start to expand around the Southwest. And I got a phone call from my mother, and she said, you know the land that we own with some friends a few hours outside of Philadelphia? I grew up in Philadelphia. A company came by and they want to lease it. They want to drill a well there. And this was preposterous. I'd grown up going weekends up here and summer vacations up to this land. It's about 100 acres. It's incredibly rocky. It's right in the middle of what used to be a bunch of dairy farms. But this was the rocky area that the farmers didn't want. So we were able to buy it on the cheap and run around. And this was, for a city kid like myself, this is where you got in touch with nature. And so all of a sudden, I was forced to step out of being a journalist because the question she asked me was, should we do it? Should we lease the land? Is this good? And I had covered this for 5 years. I knew all the players and had interviewed them and knew the numbers. When you're a Wall Street Journal reporter, you have to crunch a lot of numbers. And all of a sudden, she was asking me this really incredibly important question, which was not just should we do it, but if we do it, is this going to help? Is this going to make the world a better place? Is this going to destroy the land? And it were these incredibly difficult questions. And in some ways, I had struggled with them. But now all of a sudden, I had to confront them on a very personal level. So it took me a while to sort of stop and think about, well, how do I answer that? And what I finally did, I was thinking a lot about that. And I was thinking about a trip I had made recently to New Mexico, Ted Turner's ranch. Beautiful spread of land, almost was a national park, and he was allowing some natural gas drilling. And we had written about all the various efforts he had undertaken to try to keep the land pristine and beautiful. He brought a lot of big game hunters in who paid quite a lot of money. And so I said, well, look, it's going to be intrusive, it's going to be noisy, it's going to be industrial, but there are ways to do it. And I think natural gas can really help this change we're going through in the country, this energy transformation, because we really are. We are going through a period where we are leaving the old way we used to do things, coal, nuclear, oil, and we're moving to this new future, which is a lot more gas and a lot of renewables. And I said, look, natural gas is part of that. It will help put us on a path to where we want to be. And do your best to write a lease so that it inconveniences you as little as possible. But if you're asking me whether you should do it, yeah, you probably should. And that was the answer I gave.
And there was some money on the table.
There was a lot of, it's unbelievable. This was the boom. This is when people were just throwing around money to try to grab as many leases as they could. Yeah, there was money involved, and I said, I'm covering this for the Wall Street Journal. I don't want to know exactly how much. I found out for the book, and I don't want to know what you do with the money. Try to keep me away from that. But no, they were talking about $4,000 an acre, and this was 100 acres of land. So it wasn't all my parents. They co-owned it with about 5 or 6 other couples. But this is what happened here out in the Marcellus in Pennsylvania, in the Eagleford of South Texas, and North Dakota. When the landmen came, they talk very real money, especially if you have a few acres, and it becomes very difficult to resist.
Well, before we leave the family farm, as it's called in, believe it or not, the Endless Mountains, where he spent his weekends, did the well prove out, or was it dry?
Well, no, that's the amazing thing about shale, is that the wells are all good. They might not all be money makers. You might spend too much, but if you're in a shale rock and you drill a well, you're going to get oil and gas out of it. So they bulldozed about an acre and a half right towards the front of the property. They put in industrial facilities there. It's going to ultimately hold 8 wells. They've drilled 2 so far. And so here's the good and the bad news. The good news is the water's fine, the air's fine. You can still go up there. You can canoe on this little pond and enjoy yourself. That's the good news. Did not destroy anything. The bad news is that when I asked my parents, I said, well, one of the things you need to do is make sure that this well is built right. So call up Chesapeake and ask them, how are you making sure that this well is going to stand up for 20, 30, 40, 50 years? What are you doing to test well integrity? And my father got the runaround, and he was transferred to Oklahoma City and then to some regional office in Pittsburgh and back to Oklahoma City, never found out. And that is a concern. I mean, I write about that a lot in the book. If we're going to be drilling so many wells and fracking them, and we do in the United States drill about 100 wells a day right now, we need to make sure it's being done right, because that's a legacy we really can't afford. And that's, if we're not drilling these wells right and we're leaving behind wells that can leak and impact the aquifers, then that's a legacy that we're going to look back on with a lot of regret instead of excitement that we did something right with this energy bonanza.
Well, let's take that personal story now and move it over to the Eagleford shale play, because I think that there is an extraordinary tension between this incredible amount of money that has flowed into South Texas. Lots of families like yours have suddenly been showered with money. A lot of wealthy people have become a lot wealthier. Mm-hmm. Tens of thousands of jobs, good jobs, have been created. On the other hand, people are enormously concerned about the environment. These wells individually take 2.5 million gallons of water in a state where water is very scarce, particularly in a drought. There's a lot of concern about re-injecting the chemical contaminated water back into the ground, about surface well conditions, which you just mentioned, and those leading to ground pollution. And also South Texas has been changed forever in terms of the small town culture, which I don't want to romanticize it. It's also a very impoverished area, and so many people there would say, we'll take the jobs, thank you. Yeah. But all booms lead to a bust, do they not, eventually? And what do you think the legacy of all that is?
Well, it's a great question. And last time I was down there, I was in Carrizo Springs, maybe a year ago or so. And it's, when I was working for the San Antonio Express News in the mid-'90s, one of the things I did was I drove around a lot in South Texas. And I remember these towns, Cotulla, Carrizo Springs, and you go there now and you don't even recognize them. They are not the same town anymore. It's as if a new town of man camps and 24-hour McDonald's have just sort of been placed down on top of it. And not quite sure where the old town was. One of the real signatures of this boom is how quickly it's moved. And there's some good about that, but then there's also some bad. And we were 10 years into this boom before regulators and the companies themselves started really asking tough questions. What exactly is going on with the air